Welcome to this session. I'm Chris Gorman. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at the Center for Educational Innovation. And my role there focuses on supporting teaching and learning in STEM disciplines. And so today's discussion is part of a series of discussions offered by CEI, designed to bring together folks teaching courses with experiential components. And of course, today's discussion is going to be focused on field courses and courses with field experiences in science disciplines. So those of us who are doing things like, I'll mention what y'all are doing, but I am going to be recording this session and consolidating the notes from both what's verbally presented and then also what's exchanged in the chat. And we're doing that so that we can share all the good ideas and resources broadly with the university community, both for summer teaching and if we have to continue doing this beyond that. And so I'm going to say a big thank you at the beginning to Barbara Beers and JD Walker from my office who are helping monitor the chat and take notes. So you'll see them there. And speaking of the chat and the participants panel, because I've got my slides, you're going to find the links to the chat box down here at the bottom or up at the top. If you're not seeing it, click the 3 dots and then that will show you where the chat is. And if you don't like all those windows being on top of each other, click the escape button and your chat and participants panel will slide over to the side. All right. All right. Let me make sure I'm clicked on the right window here. So this group, like I mentioned, is all field experiences and field courses, and we're actually from quite a bit across the entire university, multiple campuses, including Duluth, and I think folks from Crookston, teaching things like biology, ecology, earth science, forestry, plant science, natural resource management of varying kinds, horticulture, crop management, a little bit of agriculture as well. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat now, just kind of saying where you normally have your field experience, or maybe what it is that you teach. Something that would help folks know what it is that they could connect with you about, or that different people who are teaching similar things in different departments can find each other who may not know each other already. I'm going to keep going, but I encourage you to toss those in there and then we can refer back to them, or you can check them back out at the end as well and see who else is there. So go ahead in the chat and just put what it is that your course is and or kind of where your field experience normally is. All right. And then as you're doing that, I'll tell you that our goal for today is to share ideas and problem solve together. As you can imagine, there are actually very few people on the University of Minnesota campus who have done virtual field experiences of the type that many of you will be engaged with this summer. In particular. And so the idea is to share those ideas. Sue, oh man, you just gave it to me, but Sue I'm gonna let her do it. Thank you. Just is gonna share her experience. And then we're gonna have a conversation where we can problem solve. So I really invite you during that problem solving part to say, hey, here's what I'm doing and here's what I'd like to do. What do people think and how are they approaching that? Or what ideas have they heard? And then we'll do that format using the Zoom tools, asking questions either during the chat, which I'll bring forward, or you guys can respond to one another in that format, or you can raise your hand to talk. I'm going to ask that you raise your hand because we've got nearly 45 people here. So just for ease, if you can, in the participants panel, hit that raise hand button and then I'll come to you. That would be really helpful. Great. We got lots of introductions going on, and I already know what these introductions are saying because I read the registrations, so I'm going to skip sifting through those, but I encourage you guys to kind of look and see what others are teaching. And then finally, I am going to be done talking because the whole point here is that we can all share ideas about what we're going to do, what we might do, resources available, and how this could work. And so I'm going to start off and turn it over to Sue from Fisheries, Wildlife and Conservation Biology, who has done this before and is going to tell us a bit about what that was like. And then we'll turn it over to discussion.
I'm going to try to share.
Yep, so I'm going to stop and then you're going to share.
Okay.
Is that working? So it'll be here at the bottom.
How's that? Can you see my screen?
Perfect.
You can? You see restoring Minnesota?
Yes, I see you, Minnesota.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm glad to be here, and I want to acknowledge my co-instructor, Julia Bonin, who I think is on with us today, who was part of the development of these courses as well. You know, judging from the people who've checked in already and described what you're doing in the field, you know, some of what you'll find that I'm talking about will be relevant, and hopefully others will have other strategies, because certainly it's not an easy task to think about covering some of what you teach online, or some of what you teach in the field online. The courses that Julia and I have been teaching is a 5-course series called Restoring Minnesota, and it was developed for adult learners, but has been taught to undergraduates a couple of times. As you can see in the diagram, basically this series of courses, there's 5 courses in the series. Each of them is approximately equivalent to a 1-credit course. So what I'm describing is about 5 credits of content. Each of the courses, as you'll see here highlighted, is sort of structured into modules, about 7 different modules. This class was not originally a classroom course or a field course. Originally, it began as an online course. So the topic is ecological restoration, which is one that people don't oftentimes think of as being something that can be taught online. And so this was a pretty big challenge for us when we started developing these courses back in about 2011 and 2012. And we've taught them continuously for the past 6 years. One thing I want to point out is that I'm just going to hit the highlights here. Probably the most important thing that we did that I think is of generalizable value is we were quite rigorous with how formal we were with thinking about course objectives in a very detailed way. Pretty much we had to break down everything that we wanted to teach into competencies, and we did it almost in a kind of a slavish kind of way, trying to figure out exactly when we were going to be able to deliver on you know, basically something that was at the lower end of the taxonomy of cognitive skills, something like understand, versus when we were actually going to attempt to have people be able to analyze or evaluate. And so we really did not develop content before we were clear on what we were trying to achieve, or we didn't get very far into the development of it. So, and what I mean by that too is that if we couldn't actually test it, then we didn't consider it really kind of a valid competency. So that helped us a lot when we were trying to tease apart what actually were we doing in the field, because I think some of what we do in the field is very specific sort of skill that you're trying to build, or cognitive ability. Other times it's more social, or sort of the general vibe of being outdoors, or sometimes even, I think we sometimes can have students be standing around outside looking at things, but not necessarily doing anything different than they would have done in the classroom, except they're outdoors. And I think that's one thing to sort of try to separate out, when they're actually doing something in the field that must be done in the field or not. And I think you'll be surprised at how often you can probably tease them apart and try to come up with another sort of way to approach that. The kinds of things we do in our courses are the standard kinds of sort of lecture content presentation. This is all asynchronous, so it's all self-paced. And so one example you see here in the upper right-hand corner, we intersperse straightforward content slides with engagement slides, basically trying to have them you know, kind of try out their skill. That doesn't really have a whole lot to do with field necessarily, except we're trying to embed things where people are actively learning versus passively learning. And I think that's an important part of trying to build a class that replaces at least some of what we hope to do in a field course. The other thing we do intentionally in this course to try to replace some of the field experience is we have a fair number of videotaped guest lectures. And who you can see here is Dave Crawford, now retired park naturalist from Wild River State Park. And so we had, I think, some pretty nice opportunities to do some decent videos that would be maybe even higher quality than what we would have achieved on a standard field trip day, because we were able to have it a bit more scripted and have him address specific learning objectives. The other component that we used quite a bit to try to, again, get at some of the competencies that we would cover in the field were assignments. And you'll see Julia here I've got a screenshot of her video. We have what we call psych portfolio assignments. And those assignments are things where we're very intentionally trying to get at as much of the sort of analysis that people would have done in a class. I only have one more slide here. Our assignments that we do are coupled to what we call site portfolios. And this was our most kind of ambitious thing that we did to try to replicate the field experience. And so for every one of these courses, it's attached to a particular place. In this case, we have a site we call Elk River Farm. And it's basically a mini website. And you can see across the top bar the kinds of information that we have here. And so basically when students go in the field, they are accessing the kind of information that you may collect in the field. And so an example of this is on the upper right-hand side. You can see a screenshot of what happens when you click on the vegetation part of the website. What opens up is a map, and each one of those maps has a dot, and each one of those dots is a vegetation plot. So the students could decide where they're going to kind of want to do the analysis, click on that, and it opens up the vegetation plot data and a picture on the bottom from that particular plot site. So all this data was basically collected for them. This allows us to get at some of the evaluation and analysis. Certainly they don't get the same experience that you would if they place the plots, but it gets at some of the use of the data. One of the things that we learned, and then I'll be done, is that basically the cognitive Bloom's taxonomy is only one of the 3 domains. So those of you with education backgrounds will be familiar with this. But the thing that we really struggle with in restoration is trying to replace the psychomotor skills. So the psychomotor domain of Bloom's taxonomy, and you can take a look at sort of what those things are, and trying to figure out how you give students experience to be able to, actually develop a skill, be able to decide how to use a skill, or automatically know how to do a skill. When it comes down to it, as I put these classes together, I had to admit that my own class in the classroom, even though we were doing field trips, wasn't really particularly good at developing the psychomotor skills anyhow. We can do some things in a restoration field trip, like on the lower left, doing things like, hand collecting seeds. But a lot of the skill in restoration, like you see here in the lower right, where you're actually doing some advanced skills, like, working with actually the machinery to do, seed collection or seed collection, seed application, isn't something that we have the resources or the opportunity to do in the classroom or the field trips. So it really kind of also gave me a sense of the limitations that my field trips already had, and maybe a better sense of how I was going to try to overcome those in my regular classroom class. So what I guess I'm pointing out here is by developing these courses, I sort of became more apparent, it became more apparent to me of what skills I wasn't doing in my regular field trips. Some of these I've worked to try to do some other kinds of things to give students those skills. And in other cases, it's more of admitting you're going to need an internship to get at some of those. So I guess my takeaway message is being really clear on competencies, I think has helped us quite a bit.
Thanks so much for that, Sue. Now I want to turn it over and see what kinds of questions you have directly for Sue before we kind of maybe get into a little bit more problem solving kind of mode. You can either ask these questions in the chat or feel free to raise your hand. I see Jay's actual hand up, but if you also want to hit the hand button in the participants, I can queue up some others. So I'll turn to Jay first and then watch for some other hands as well.
Sue, it wasn't clear to me as you were talking, do this in the remotely taught version, do you actually assign the students to go out into the field and do anything?
Yeah, in this course, no, we did not. We have basically the entire thing is online. We did have a 8-hour field course that followed it if you passed the course, but we haven't been doing that in the last few years. Part of it has to do with the fact that what you need to set up for the field trips is pretty labor intensive. So this is entirely online.
Other questions for Sue?
I have a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead, James.
This is James Forrester. Sue, how long did it take you to develop that class in its current form? I mean, it looks really slick, and it looks like you guys put a lot of thought not only into the design of it, but also in the production. I'm just curious how long that took you, and if you have any suggestions for how to streamline that for our own courses.
Yeah, we did this, we got a grant back in 2010. And so it was pretty early on in this. So I'm hedging a little bit because we had a grant and we had a team. Part of the inefficiency though, that we took like 2 years to develop this had to do with where the state of the technology was 10 years ago when we developed it. And also our profound lack of skill when we began it. The fact that there weren't very many instructional designers, and we actually went through 3 instructional designers before we got one. I guess maybe that I could get along with, I don't know. So I think that I'm hedging. 2 years sounds like a lot of time. It wouldn't take us that long right now, but it was clear that we needed instructional designers, especially who would help us kind of craft the competencies and do that part and really kind of help us be rigorous with that. The other thing is that I don't program in Java. I don't do JavaScript programming, and we needed that. And we hired videographers, we hired JavaScript programmers. So those are skills that neither Julia or I had.
Well, and some of the
plenty of you folks probably are better at videotaping than Julia and I are. We could probably do that now. Neither of us still have the JavaScript background, so we had to hire that.
Well, and there's also some components of that class which I see work really well with like Google Maps. So them, getting pins in a field site and then having those pins have pictures associated with them and links and descriptions and stuff is a feature now that's very easy that in 2010 must have been very challenging.
Right. So that would have been, kind of impossible for mere mortals at that point, which is why we needed to, I think, approach it in a different way then. Things are pretty far along compared to where we were then.
I'm going to go to Marcella.
Yeah, Sue, thank you. So having had some time to reflect on this, what would you do differently if you were embarking on this now?
Well, we just reworked them all. Julia and I just finished kind of revising all the class, so we had a little opportunity to think about that. One of the things we needed to do was make sure we could update everything on our own, and when we were paying for too many services, we didn't have the skills to update the products that people had sort of developed for us. So that's one thing. I think probably that's the major thing. The other thing is I wish that the university had more asynchronous tools where we had more hot button kinds of, kind of development things. So part of it is wishing the university had a little bit more to offer us for asynchronous learning.
And people might want to note that in the chat, Annette has added a place to look for some help for getting help from instructional designers on projects like this. You can all see that there at teaching support at umn.edu.
And Annette, I must say, was the person who worked with Julia and I on our recent upgrade and spent, basically a fair amount of time helping us from one platform to the next. So thanks, Annette, for everything you've done for this course too. So having an instructional designer to work with fairly regularly I think, has been critical for us. I mean, we had a lot to learn, I think is one of the big things.
And James, I'll add a point here, and I don't know if maybe Annette or others kind of on the support side might have other thoughts on this as well, but a typical build is going to be longer than what most of us are looking at in terms of lead time. I know some of you are teaching May session, and some of you are teaching in June, and some of you have until August, and some of you are hoping that you are not planning for September. And that one of the things as you do a quick launch is really, as Sue said, looking at those learning objectives and deciding which of these are crucial, which of these can be separated from the field. So as Sue said, you know, some of that analysis or kind of cognitive ability you can do in one way that's very kind of replicating the field. And in another way, you might do the psychomotor, and you might, or where you might do something where they pull something from their local environment and then do something with that. And it's not the same as it would be in the field, but maybe it can replicate some of those motor skills that you want them to learn, but not on the same stuff that's the field site stuff. So maybe thinking about which learning objectives are primary and which ones are crucial that they learn now, which ones you might be able to backfill later with a half day kind of thing once we are available to be in person as well.
And be ready to find out that maybe some of what you're doing in a very different way turns out to be better than what you thought was ideal all along. I mean, you could gain something from just sort of pulling this all apart and deciding what, you know, kind of becoming much more clear and intentional about what you're doing.
So I'd love to kind of turn over a little bit to problem solving mode, and to particularly for those who are coming up on a quicker launch, but if those of you who are farther out but have given some thought to what it might look like, wanted to propose, here's kind of what I'm thinking, and here are some of the questions or challenges that are arising as I think through it. And I'll have you raise your hand, and then you can unmute and describe your challenge.
And while we're waiting for that, you can just notice that also there's a special note to CFANS folks about help in these areas as well in the chat.
Yeah, Tracy Wilson can be a first contact for you in academic technology. So I'll go to Karen Gran from Duluth.
Sure. So I'm teaching a 6-week geology field course this summer. And this is normally taught with several instructors in Utah, where this is a chance for students to actually get out in the field and finally see rocks and collect data and create maps. And I want to throw out what's happening with field camp because it's in emergency mode like so many things are right now. But this is a class that is common to the geology major across the country. And so most field camps have been closed, and most senior geology majors need this to graduate. So there are a number of virtual field camps that are being run, and there's a huge community effort to develop content for that. And it started, I like the way that Sue mentioned the first thing to do is sit down and figure out your learning objectives, because the whole effort started with a bunch of us who got together over the weekend one day and developed a series of learning objectives of what do we actually want our students to get out of field camp. And the way we pitched that discussion was describe sort of the ideal student who's graduating from
Oh, Karen, did we lose you?
this class. I don't know.
Nope.
Did you lose
Okay,
me, or am I?
I lost you at first describe students at the end of this.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm getting my internet is unstable flashing. So we developed this list of learning objectives, and now the whole community is building modules that link in with specific learning objectives. And so it's allowing camps from across the country to sort of plug those in to how they want to craft their own camp. And I know one thing that I'm struggling with is how we remind students that this is a field class. So when everything has become virtual and we have them roaming around on Google Earth, finding outcrops and doing sketches on their screen, how do we instill back in some of the skills that fundamentally are field skills? How do you keep a field notebook? How do you sketch in the field? How do you actually use some of the equipment that they would normally learn in field camp? And so I'm curious if other people have ideas about that element. So it's not teaching the higher order skills, but teaching some of the very specific field skills and sort of reminding students that this is a field experience.
I'll go to Jay.
Yeah, well, I have no idea if this is going to work. because I never tried it. But I'll be able to tell you in June. And this is why I asked Sue the question. As we go through the parts that we're going to do remotely, each time we have a field trip, not only do I provide them, with the videos and the stills and whatever for them to experience that, but I ask them, wherever they are, they need to go out on their own, just one student at a time, and make some observation or measurement. There are assignments for them that directly uses the skills they're supposed to be developing, or in some way is a quasi-field experience. They may not be able to do exactly the same thing. For example, somebody might be in California taking this course, but they're going to have to go out and make certain observations and report them, and make certain measurements and report them, and talk about what troubles they had. And then when we have our regular Zoom meetings, they'll be discussing how did they do, what issues did they have, what seemed really cool, what was impossible, et cetera, et cetera. That's my idea anyway.
I know some folks down in the cities for a field camp have been batting around the concept of doing a field camp that's based. Can I cue you up, Josh? I see you about kind of engaging with an urban environment for an earth science experience.
Yeah, I can talk about that. I may, before I talk about that, can I try responding to Karen's question?
Yeah, please.
Because everything that Karen is describing, we're benefiting from enormously in the Twin Cities. So thank you. We're using a lot of those modules, and we're working with a lot of those working groups that are part of the effort that you started. This morning we were meeting and trying to figure out some related issues to what you were talking about how do we remind students this is a field course and start to get some of those ideas in. And one of the people in our group, who was a graduate student, actually was really clever. But we're thinking about every morning starting with a sort of 35-minute debriefing for the day's activities for the field class. Why don't we stop and then have the students try and plan out, what they would actually do within their groups to try and address what the day's goals were, and meet with one of the TAs in a sort of almost like Dungeons and Dragons style sort of interaction kind of thing, where today's weather is going to be this. What part of the landscape are you hoping to go to? Where are you expecting to be at different times? Do you have to, plan to take certain kinds of gear because of the weather? Do you have to plan to take certain kinds of gear in order to make the measurements you need to do? Just to try and sort of like brainstorm and force some of that planning to happen as part of the class that normally is a really important part of those field experiences. I don't know, that was something that seemed like it was a good idea to me. I don't know if that resonates with you at all. I can talk about the urban field geology course if you like, but we can also hold off too.
I was more thinking of it in the realm of just ways to have people engage in their own environment in spaces where you might not think, that don't feel like field camp, but I'll come to Karen first.
Oh, I was just going to sort of respond to that I guess we've been thinking about doing kind of a combination of what you mentioned and what Jay said, of having students go out and like do a field sketch and have them actually keep a field notebook while they're at field camp, where they write down at the beginning, like, what is the weather like and where am I, and keep, a log of where they're going for our drive arounds or whatever. And then, and an important element is being able to plan a field expedition. So that's being built in at the end of some of these remote exercises of how would you actually plan to do field checking in this place? Like, where do you access the field? Which slopes can you not go up and down? What's off limits? That sort of thing. I like the idea of actually throwing the weather at them though. Yeah. You always bring your raincoat.
Other questions, or does someone want to throw another challenge into the fire?
Hi, this is Ingrid Schneider.
Go for it.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yes. I'm just curious about the assumptions maybe some of us are making that people have access to the outdoors. And if there are opportunities to do virtual experiences. I'm thinking about students who, just the variety of situations we can be in the urbanization of our society and equity issues. Thanks.
Anybody want to respond?
And I can jump in for how we were planning to do it, which was that they can do sketches in their living room. We're planning to have some outcrops on the screen for them to practice with, and then tell them they need to go outside or into a different room or sketch something, but it's really more the mechanics of how they're doing that rather than actually being able to get outside. Because I'm assuming people are going to be all over the place and some won't have access to that.
Great. I'm going to come to Marcella.
Yeah, so this has been a lot of the discussion that we've been having with teaching a May field forestry class. And so what we've been developing among the instructors is almost a choose your own adventure. So that way students can kind of access material that they're more interested in and also maybe have access to. So 2 of the 3 experiences are not field-based and 1 is. So they would need to choose 2 of the 3. So depending on where they are, depending on interest, and also really importantly, depending on comfort level of being able to be outside right now, they could still complete the class without going outside, or if that going outside is something really important for that mental health and they have access to it, they would be able to complete one of those assignments. So trying to balance both the positive and the negative of going outside and doing some of these experiences may be really good and satisfying and for that mental health for some students, but may also cause more stress for other students. So it's not a perfect solution, but trying to balance and really focus on what an individual student might respond to.
Other thoughts on this topic?
Thank you both.
This is, oh.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I just wanted to ask Karen, she had mentioned, part of the course objectives are for them to learn how to do specific measurements. And, I'm envisioning measuring slope, for example. What are they thinking? What's the current thought process where the actual measurement is a significant part of the course, is learning how to do specific measurements with specialized equipment? Any thoughts on how you're going to approach that in your course?
Yeah, so a lot of it, I mean, that's actually one of the interesting discussions. I like kind of the way Sue pitched it. Once you actually sit down and write down the learning objectives, not that many of them are, in this case, learning specific tools. It's more the importance is synthesis and collecting field data and then having to tell a story about the entire landscape, even though you have you only have small pieces of data here and there. There are some skills like using a Brunton compass, and students usually get a lot of experience with that. My internet's unstable again, so hopefully this will work. But they usually get a lot of experience with that, and we have thought about actually like mailing them Brunton compasses so they can have some experience, even if it's measuring like books in their living room. So they'll have a chance to like actually work with that equipment and they won't leave field camp without it. I'm actually more concerned about that aspect with my fall course, which is a surface processes course where students are learning to measure hill slopes and collect discharge data and rivers and do soil descriptions. And the whole thing is about all those tools. And I don't have a good answer for that yet.
Yeah, I've given, I teach a forest measurements course, and I've given thought to mailing some of the key equipment to the students. And, but, then that brings up issues that Ingrid brought up in terms of their access to the outdoors. And, even to trees in terms of being able to measure tree heights and be able to try some of those things. It's a real tough aspect to think about how to incorporate that major learning outcome.
They could always measure heights of buildings if they had to.
Yeah, that's true. There's definitely those things.
This is something that a lot of folks who are dealing with, you know, kind of traditional science labs of varying kinds, and in facilitating that one of those discussions last week, it seems like there's a lot of thoughts around how to get equipment to students. So some stuff, you know, some things you can work with a vendor to have sent, some things you can just give a list from Amazon and instead of the field fee, or so for example, the intro bio course on the Twin Cities campus, when offered online, they waive the lab fee, but then they have them buy the kit. It actually ends up cheaper for the students. And chemistry here on the Twin Cities campus is also playing around with, do they want to send students, you know, glassware sets and have that organized by the tech? But it seems like there's a lot of different ways to get things to the students, but the question is, of course, around equity, cost, and fees. But if they trade off with some things which are now not costing because they are not, you know, or your lab fees get maybe distributed differently. I don't know if that works for departmental finances, but it might be thinking about creative solutions there.
I'd like to, can I pose another question?
Yes, please. I was just going to ask for one, or I've got one. But go, James.
The one thing I'll comment on the choose your own adventure, I've been doing that with my online field course right now, which is sort of like an intro class. And that's, you know, I've said, okay, if you folks that want to go out and have the ability to, this is that option, which is what I was planning on originally. And then I have a shelter in place option, which is doing stuff on the computer, which isn't as good, but gives them a different option to, you know, as they feel safe and have access. And that seems to have worked. It's been about 50-50 for how people have split up. My question is more, Sue mentioned this when she was talking earlier, it's more has to do with the camaraderie aspect and the sort of, which is one of the, you know, the strengths I think of most of the field classes that many of us do, is you'll have students come in with really heterogeneous backgrounds. And I find, having taught a field course for many years, that one of the advantages of these field courses is that they bind together and they lift each other up, and everybody gets a better experience, even if they came in with maybe uneven backgrounds. And I wonder, how do we try to get at that with this online situation where, because I feel I've been seeing already, I run an asynchronous class right now. And I can already see that there's, you know, some folks are just, they're gung-ho, right? They're going out, they're collecting the stuff, they're asking questions, and they have that personality or that curiosity that drives them. But the nature of this online course means that doesn't necessarily help their colleagues very much. And I'm wondering if people have strategies for how to try to get some of that esprit de corps in that online course.
Anybody want to chime in? I'm watching for raised hands, or you can just unmute.
I don't have any experience with that, James, but I think probably maybe running some synchronous sessions and, you know, putting them into a Zoom breakout room and so on, and requiring people to show up, you know, occasionally, not real often, but end up with tasks that you can get them working in groups online, I think would be one way of doing it.
And as you're thinking about potentially having students work on tasks in breakout rooms, one of the things to consider is how they'll have instructions for doing those tasks. So one of the things that's nice in an in-person is that you have maybe a slide or a handout that's got the instructions on it. And when you put them in groups, they can still see those slides. In Zoom, when you put them in a breakout room, they can't see your slides anymore. So you want to make sure that you have a Google Doc or something where the instructions for those activities are, that they can access once they go into their breakout room and come back as well. What are other ways to kind of maintain the esprit de corps?
Hi, this is Sarah from Academic Technology Support Services, and I'm an instructional designer that's helped people put courses into online classes. And I think one of the things, especially with the question that was just asked, is being really explicit with students that part of what you want them to do in the fall or your summer, fall, whenever you're doing this, But in the beginning of the course, you want to say, my intention is for you to be able to connect with other students. And so if you have a group project where they're producing something together, let those students sort of figure out how they're going to work together, but have that explicit at the beginning of the course. And if it's more, you just want them to be able to brainstorm together, and they're not necessarily producing something together, but they're just learning from one another. And as you said, building each other up, mention that, tell them that this is part of what you want them to do, and build some, low stake activities at the beginning of the course for them to interact with each other and get to know each other, even though it may be asynchronously and it may be, offline, or, not in Zoom. It could be in Zoom, it could not be in Zoom. But build some of those low stake opportunities out there for them earlier in the semester.
And then one of the things that keeps coming up in the discussions that I've been having is that Flipgrid as a tool can be a really good one. It's supported centrally by the university, and basically it allows less than 5-minute videos in a grid, and a student can post, say, a first one and then have other students respond. Or you can have all of your students do introductions that way. They can show their video or not. You can have an icon show instead of your video. So it does offer some opportunity for anonymity, or people who don't want to show their face, or their internet is not behaving itself, or whatnot. Audio can be easier. I'm going to come to Forrest and then back to Sue.
Yes, this is Forrest, and I manage Cedar Creek Ecosystem Science Reserve, which is a biological field station in CBS. We're just 30 miles north of the Twin Cities campuses, and so I would just remind people that it may be possible to give students some access to outside while keeping them on the Twin Cities campus, because we're technically still part of the Twin Cities campus, and so current travel restrictions don't prevent students from having access for daily commutes. So they obviously couldn't come stay overnight, but we have a public trail that's open right now, and so if it helps, we can talk on an individual basis about specific course needs, and I'm happy to help facilitate that. I'm thinking mostly for the summer and the fall. I think May session is going to be a bit tricky. We're trying to navigate lots of other things right now.
Great. I'm going to go. Anything? I don't want to interrupt Forrest.
Oh, no, sorry. That's all.
That's my life too. So I completely understand. I'll come to Sue next.
I was just going to follow up on what Sarah said, and then also put a plug in for things like Flipgrid and voice threads, and having that get to know you phase, to sort of the students are probably going to have the best shot at getting to know each other and working well in groups if they've introduced themselves to each other and gotten to know each other sort of in ways that are a little bit more casual than the course content. So in classes where these were classroom classes where I've had some challenges with that in the past, that's worked out really well for sort of just building group dynamic. So I guess I'd put in a plug for that.
Cool. I'll come to Andrew David.
Hi, folks. I teach dendrology in the fall and plant ID at Cloquet Forestry Center in the summer. And I mean, theoretically, I could just say, hey, I'm just going to videotape everything or pull together, Kodachrome slides and slap them in a PowerPoint and say, watch this, you'll be tested on it. I'd really love to be able to do video streaming from the field. I mean, even if I can't get to Cloquet, I can probably find at least half of those plants just on my own property outside of Grand Rapids, or close enough. I could find all of them probably within 10 miles of my house. Is there a way, does anyone know technically a good way to do that? Cameras, something that'll do Zoom as well as do audio. And I mean, ideally I'd be linked in so that, they're listening and they're watching from their couch and I'm out in a bog someplace, and they're going to say, wait, no, I didn't understand that last bit of, taxonomy, or that last bit. What was that word? What does it mean? And I could just hear that question and use the camera and my, and my fingers or a pencil to point to it. Any ideas?
I'm going to defer to our academic technologist. Does Annette or Sarah or Tracy want to jump in?
depending on where you are, you can there's a Zoom app and you can walk out with your phone. I don't know if you're talking about, but I've seen it done. I think Ingrid, in fact, didn't you do something this semester with your phone of going out and doing something like that? Somebody suggested Facebook Live, Google Hangouts. And we know some people that have done get the GoPro things, on your head, where you can do some of that, but that would be more of a recording as opposed to a live thing. Other ideas?
Well, I'm not against recording it and putting it up for them to see it as well. And maybe it's because it's been so long, but I've found that usually the phone doesn't have the ability to zoom in and keep things clear. I mean, that's something I can try, absolutely. And, I've got Zoom on the phone, but I'm in the past when I've video recorded in the field, it's been, I borrowed a really nice camera and I had a tripod and someone else was working the tripod while I was doing all the larger plants.
The technical piece, if you can get it recorded on any device, is that then you can upload it into Kaltura, and then it can be available just like anything else in your course site, and it doesn't need to be created through a live stream, especially if you're wanting students to see it. And then if you wanted them to annotate that video with questions, so it's like, wait, show me that one again, so you could make another video or ask a question. There's a service, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but it came up yesterday called Video Ant. And that service can allow students to annotate a video. So if you want students to be able to say at minute 2.0, I have a question, that could be a way in which they can provide that. Caitlin, do you want to say more about this? She's got a cool suggestion in the chat, but I'm curious if you'll unmute and say more.
Sure, I'm happy to. Let me see if I can get my video to turn on as well even. Like Forrest, I work up at Cedar Creek, and one of the things that I had done a few years ago before all of this stuff came together and needed to happen. Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
My computer has frozen, but if you can hear me, then I'm going to keep talking. I went out with my pretty crappy Android smartphone and took some 360-degree photos several years ago on this one trail that we often take field trip groups and classes and visitors out on. And then in Google Tour Creator over the last couple of weeks, I have been building kind of a virtual walkthrough. And just like Sue was saying, earlier in this call, the technology and the interfaces have gotten so much better over even just the last few years. And so it's now pretty straightforward in Google Tour Creator, if you have a 360-degree photo to build off of, to insert close-up shots of particular plants or of particular animals, to insert audio clips, to insert video clips. Google calls them points of interest. And so you can kind of set the stage and then focus in on the little pieces that you really want your students to notice. The downside is that I haven't found a good way to integrate kind of the annotation or assessment pieces. There's not a place for students to write in answers to questions that you pose, for example. But it does a lot of the things that maybe would be useful in the sort of case that you're talking about, and doesn't require you to have data or cell phone access or Wi-Fi kind of to stream live in the field. Might work in an asynchronous sort of setting.
Thanks, Caitlin.
And like Forrest, I'm happy to talk more outside of this call with anyone that's thinking of doing that sort of stuff. I can put my email in the chat.
The other thing I was thinking of was the live video streaming may also be a way to kind of build that sense of community as a group, because they're constantly interacting, hopefully with you, or you're interacting with them individually, and they're all hearing that at the same time.
Yeah, I've had a lot of folks in engineering actually using Zoom on their phones. They're actually logging in both from their computers and their phones, using it as a doc cam, but they've had a lot of success logging into Zoom and having it film things while they're talking to students during office hours. And so And actually, I've been using it personally. So I do know that it holds as long as your internet goes all the way out to wherever you want to be on your property or your cell signal, which may be a big if. All right, I'm going to come. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can you just, can you repeat what you just said? You said something about using the phone and the laptop in tandem, using the phone as a dock cam. Was that the term?
Yeah, no, that was the usage, but it would work probably. So you can log into Zoom from more than one account or more than one location. And so some of the science and engineering faculty that I've been working with this semester, in order to have a dock cam either for lecturing or for doing office hours, a lot of the engineers are MacGyvering solutions to holding their phone on a ruler over cardboard boxes or on tripods or chip clipped to things. And then you log into Zoom from your phone, and then they can still see you and you can gesture at them, but then they see the piece of paper, or in your case, if you wanted to show them specimens, but you still wanted to have that like live feel, you can basically have, two people. One is what you're seeing off your phone, and one which is yourself.
I didn't get, so like a document camera.
If you actually Google DIY.cam or cell phone.cam, you get like more than you need of videos of people creating these things out of household items, and a lot of engineering folks now.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Are there any other questions that folks want to throw out to the group? I'm going to defer. There were a bunch of questions, not a bunch, but there were a handful of questions that were kind of more technical in nature in the registration form. Questions like, how do I set up video? How can I have students really experience an outcrop? And I think we've seen a number of solutions here. Also, academic technology support services, your local folks in CFANS or in CFANS for this particular group would be available. A good first point of contact, if you have no idea who would have the answer to your question, just send it to teachingsupport@umn.edu, and we would be more than happy. It routes it to the right place based on the content of your question, and you don't have to know where the right place is. And as Annette said, there are folks available, and particularly for these high experiential courses, they're of particular concern for us, and we want to be making sure that we can support you and support you meeting those goals, and we know that they're really hard. What I would love to do now is I've got a quick poll question, which is, how would you, if you would, want to continue connecting with this group? So would you want to have another discussion with this group, maybe even one that's got, I don't know, smaller breakout groups where I can find more information from you, a Google listserv where you can ping each other, say, hey, I've got this question, I'm facing this issue, things like that, or I'm good, that's fine, but thank you. And any of those are completely fine, and select as many as you'd like. And if you could just select on that poll, that would be really helpful. And then the final thing that I want to ask before we go is just, we're doing a lot of these discussions, and we'd also like to get better at them as we do them. So if you could give us some feedback, we have a short feedback form. It's only 3 questions, z.umn.edu/virtual5. And then, as I said, we've recorded this session. One of my colleagues has been taking notes. We'll also consolidate the kind of major themes of what came up. And then we'll send it back to you next week, and it'll be available on the CEI website as well. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming and sharing and being vulnerable and questions, but also having great solutions for one another. I think the challenge of working in the field is one that's really hard, but I think Sue and others, I think, highlighted really nicely, which is to really evaluate what is it that we're trying to get students to do. What is it that we want them to learn, and how do we want them to feel at the end of it? And I think that feeling aspect of how do we create that camaraderie, how do we have them appreciate the place in which they have, or the ways in which we interact in the field, is worthwhile to think deeply about. And it may not be that the experience of doing the analysis is the same as the affective, and maybe those are a little bit separated in this environment, and we just need to think about them separately. So to close, I will just say thank you to all of you for all of your great ideas, and please let me know. I'll leave this window open, and I'll stick around if you've got questions either for me or for each other, or you want to keep talking in the chat. So thank you all so much, and have a great afternoon.